Hi everyone, I'm standing up and we're in front of a blank white wall. So that's how you know I mean business today. Most of the pieces I decluttered were in some of my most worn colors. From pieces I've had for months to one piece I've had for over years. The most common fabric was actually at 20 pieces. My observation was confirmed. 2 weeks ago, I cleaned out my closet. While going through that process, I started to notice patterns in the pieces I was letting go of. Certain fabrics, styles, where they came from, how long I had owned them. And once my curiosity was sparked, after noticing these repeating themes, I couldn't help but get way too into it, formally catalog every item I passed on by source, color, fabric, age, fit, style, and more, and do a full-on data analysis. Look at this spreadsheet. I made several graphs. I got so serious about this. I love fashion data. Now, I do want to make it clear, I am not a data analyst. I am not a statistician. This is not a peer-reviewed study. The closest thing I have to a qualification is the 1 semester I spent working in a research lab while getting my bachelor's degree in psychology. So while I tried my best to execute this as soundly as I could, I am certainly not an expert. The stakes here are very low, and I accept that there may be errors. That said, I think we have a lot of interesting information to look at here. So let's just get into it. Firstly, what is the overarching number that we're working with here? The answer is 46. I decluttered 46 items. Of those, we have 14 tops, 11 bottoms, 6 dresses, 6 sweaters. I categorize those separately from tops because I feel like I use them differently. 5 accessories, 2 vests, and 2 jackets. Overall, this feels reasonably in proportion with the amount of each of those categories I have in my wardrobe. Pretty much what I'd expect. Next, let's take a look at where these clothes originally came from. As we can see here, all the things I passed on are either purchased or gifts. I did not pass on any of my self-made pieces. So that right there tells you I'm definitely more emotionally attached to those ones. It doesn't mean I'm wearing them more, but it does mean I'm not ready to let them go. Then we can see that gifts make up a pretty significant proportion of the things I'm passing on. To be fair, because of my work as a YouTuber, I also have a much higher proportion of gifts than the average person, I assume. According to my index wardrobe tracking, my wardrobe is 24% gifts. That said, gifts do still make up a slightly higher proportion of the things I'm passing on at 30%. This makes sense to me because, like I said, a lot of these gifts are for my job. Often I'm required to use or choose from a specific selection of products, which don't always reflect the exact thing I would choose to add to my wardrobe without those limitations. Plus, I just end up having more stuff, and so it's easy to pass some of it on. Also, gifts can't be tried on first, so the fit is more likely to be wrong. Then, of course, the other roughly 70% is things I bought myself. Within those pieces, I found that roughly 94% were originally thrifted, while only about 6% were items I bought new. This was actually only 2 items, both of which I bought 4 or 5 years ago. Again, I can compare this with my index stats on the rest of my wardrobe, which show that 80% of what I've bought is secondhand, while 17% is bought new. Clearly, I was much more likely to pass on thrifted items and keep items I bought new. This makes me really glad to see, because when I do buy things new, if it's from a huge corporation like Target or something, I try to really only do it for basic wardrobe essentials I know I'll wear a ton and use for years. And so it's great to know I'm generally succeeding at doing that. I haven't bought new from a place like that in a few years at this point, but a lot of those old ones are still around and still getting used, which is great. And the ones I did pass on got a lot of use before that. I do buy new more frequently from like small businesses, artists, makers. I love getting a little piece of jewelry from like a vendor at a market or a festival or something. But of course, I still try to make those wise purchases I know I can use a lot. They usually cost more than the thrift store, so I try to be extra thoughtful with how I spend my money. So it's good to see those are sticking around too. Meanwhile, I save the more offhand purchases if I just want to try something out for the thrift store because, you know, lower impact and lower cost. Overall, it's good to see that the new stuff I spend more on and try to be more thoughtful about is sticking around. All right, now that we know what these clothes are and where they came from, it's time to get into my reasons for decluttering these things. What factors went into the choice to let them go? Many of these pieces had multiple reasons, so for this particular set of data, this graph, I just counted up all of them every time a reason occurred. So if one piece had 3 different factors, I cataloged them all in this chart. Does that make sense? The most common factor was fit at 26 instances. More than half of the pieces I decluttered had some sort of issue with the fit. This includes things that were too loose, too tight, too long, too short, or any other instance where something about the fit just seemed off to me, even if it was technically the right size. The next most common factor was fabric at 16 instances. That was mostly just things made of synthetic material, no surprise there. Then we have color at 12 instances. Certain colors I just don't love or don't wear. The clothing being a style I don't wear was a factor in passing along 8 items. It was a little tricky to distinguish fit versus style in the way I categorized this. For example, I passed on a lot of crop tops tops because I don't really wear super cropped crop tops anymore. And I could see those going in style or fit category. But ultimately, I put them in the fit category because it wasn't that I wanted the tank top to have a different aesthetic vibe. It's just that it was shorter than I wanted. So that felt like more of a fit thing. I used the style I don't wear category more for items with like a particular aesthetic that doesn't super resonate with me. Like something that was too sporty or too girly or too boho, that sort of thing. Finally, there were 2 times I mentioned passing on things in part because they were impractical, and only 1 item that was just not in great condition. Clearly, the main factors were fit, fabric, color, and style. So now let's dive into those in a little more detail. First, let's take a look at fit. We know fit is a big deal for me. It was the most dominant reason I passed on certain clothing. But what specifically was wrong with the fit of those pieces? Out of these 46 pieces I passed on, 7 were too loose and 6 were too tight. Pretty even split there. But then we also have 13 items that were neither too loose nor too tight, but the fit was just wrong in some other way. Maybe it was loose in some places, tight in others. Maybe it was just too cropped. That was the case for a lot of them. Maybe a dress or skirt was a weird length, or the fit was off in some other way. And then, of course, 20 of the pieces I passed on had a perfectly fine fit, but were passed on for some other reason. One of the most interesting things about this data set for me is that equally important as clothes being too tight or too loose was also just clothes fitting weird. I feel like that's very valuable information to have because that tells me it's not just about the size of the clothing. It really is about many other elements of how it fits, which I kind of already knew about myself, but I kind of figured things that were too tight or too loose would be more dominant. But really, a lot of the things I had were actually neither of those things, but they were just off in some other way. And that still wasn't really working for me. I realize you might think it's silly I'm saying this while wearing this boxy oversized shirt, but I like loose clothes. It's just sometimes they're too loose in a way that doesn't work for me. But a lot of them do work for my taste and my style. So I'm still going to have a lot of maybe too loose clothing in my wardrobe. All right, next we got to look at our second most significant factor in choosing what to declutter, fabric. You all know I have become quite particular about fabrics over the years, but I wasn't always this way, so I definitely had some vestiges I cleaned out of my closet that reflect that. Let's look at the fabric breakdown of everything I decluttered. The most common fabric was actually cotton at 20 pieces. At first, this surprised me because I love wearing cotton, but I think this actually just indicates that I have a ton of it in my wardrobe, so inevitably some is not going to work out for other reasons. Good reminder that just because something is 100% cotton doesn't mean I'm gonna love it. There are many other flaws that clothing can have. All that said, the next most common fabric I got rid of was polyester or acrylic 100% synthetics at 13 pieces. And the next most common was cotton polyester blends at 9 pieces. So items that had synthetics in them, whether partly or fully, account for 22 of the items I passed on, slightly more than the 20 100% cotton pieces. I also know at this point synthetics make up a much smaller portion of my wardrobe than natural fibers, mostly cotton. So this was a pretty significant chunk of them. I also cataloged the reasons I chose to pass on each item, and when looking through the items where I indicated that the fabric was the reason I passed on it, every single one of those items was partly or entirely synthetic. I also realized you may be thinking I'm already biased against synthetics and towards natural materials, so I could be like getting rid of things because I know they're polyester and that makes me not like them, not because the fabric like actually feels worse to wear. You may be thinking there's a placebo effect going on here. And maybe that's true for some things, totally possible. But I also found myself passing on things without even knowing the fiber content. And then when I checked them to list on Depop and also make this video, I discovered that I repeatedly passed on cotton polyester blends because they just felt off to me in some way without even knowing what they were actually made of. Obviously, this is not a double-blind study, but I rest my case. Oh, and finally, if you're wondering about the other 4 items I passed on, they were just various miscellaneous materials. Not too much to glean from that. Next, let's look at the colors of the pieces I got rid of. I'm pretty particular about what colors I do and don't wear, so this was very interesting to me. And, you know, the colors on the other graphs were all arbitrary, obviously, but in this case, the colors of the graph do actually reflect the colors of the clothes. Except I used purple to represent colorful, multicolored pieces. So, let's take a look. First, I was honestly surprised that most of the pieces I decluttered were in some of my most worn colors. Blue, black, white, brown, green, and colorful multicolor pieces are all some of my most worn, but also some of my most decluttered. But like with the cotton pieces, I actually think this makes a lot of sense because those colors are extremely present in my wardrobe. I obviously try not to buy things in colors I don't wear in the first place. So it's not that I was getting rid of all my blue clothes, it's that I have more blue than anything else. So proportionately, it makes sense that more of the clothes I'm decluttering are also blue. But again, like with the cotton pieces I decluttered, this is a good reminder that just because I love the color of something doesn't mean I'm gonna love wearing it. It can't just have one good trait to it. It needs a combination. All that said, color definitely was still a factor. It was a reason I got rid of a number of things. So I also looked at just the pieces I decluttered, at least partially, because of the color of the piece. And those pieces were largely in colors that are not very present in my wardrobe and that I don't really wear, like a cool teal green, yellow, burgundy, and most significantly, pink. I decluttered 6 pink items, not because I have and wear a lot of pink, but because I almost never wear pink, and so I decluttered almost all the pink I had. It's interesting that pink is a color that I had a higher amount of, but also got rid of a higher amount of versus some of those other colors that are barely present in my wardrobe in the first place. And I think this is just because I love to look at the color pink. I'm very drawn to it visually. I love it in art and decor. And it's not even that I think it like doesn't suit me or whatever. I actually think I look pretty good in pink. But for some reason, I just never want to put it on my body. It just does not resonate with me in my fashion sense, even though it does resonate with me in that it makes me happy and I think it's pretty and I like to look at it. And so every so often I buy something pink for my wardrobe because I'm like, oh, this is just so beautiful. I just can't resist. And then I never want to put it on, except for then every once in a blue moon when I suddenly do. I don't know. Style is so weird. It's so personal. Why do I have such a strong yet layered and complex relationship with the color pink? Anyway, I'm glad to be keeping a few pink items, but for the most part, they were not getting worn, and as you can see, they had to go. And these other items were in colors I already knew that I don't really wear, and I'm generally not drawn to at all. So this is another one that largely reconfirmed for me what I already know about my taste. Finally, if you're curious about the blue and white pieces I passed on because of the color, there was just one of each, and in both cases, it was because it was the wrong shade of white or the wrong shade of blue, and I had other better options in the shade that I like more, or I thought they would be very easy to find. Mostly that shows me that I am very particular, which, you know, I already knew. The final factor that contributed somewhat significantly to my choice to declutter certain items was just that they were in a style I don't really wear. But this was only 8 pieces, and they were all different enough that there wasn't really a unified theme or pattern. The items that just weren't my style range from a sporty outdoorsy vest to a witchy velvet dress to a bold graphic miniskirt. So there's not really a unified theme here. Sorry that's not as interesting or insightful as the other categories. Alright, now that we've gone through the main reasons I passed things along, I want to get into some of the history of these pieces, specifically how long I owned them before getting rid of them. I feel like clothes that last for ages in your wardrobe is really something I'm always striving for when shopping. I think a lot of people are, so this is one of the most interesting data sets to me. To answer the question of how long I had had all these clothes, I did in fact go through all my previous collective haul videos to see exactly when I got things. And for everything older than my YouTube channel, I looked back through my old Instagram posts for the first documented appearance of each piece. I was truly not fucking around with this. So some of these items may be even older than I noted here, but I generally used the date of their first online appearance to mark the time they joined my wardrobe. And we have quite the range, from pieces I've had for 10 months to one piece I've had for over 9 years. That is crazy. To get more specific, I decluttered 0 items that I'd had for less than 6 months, 4 items that were 6 to 12 months old, all 4 of them were from about 10 months ago, 11 items that were 1 to 2 years old, 8 items that were 2 to 3 years old, 9 items that were 3 to 4 years old, 4 items that were 4 to 5 years old, 4 items that were 5 to 6 years old, 3 items that were 6 to 7 years old, 3 items that were 7 to 8 years old, 0 items that were 8 to 9 years old, and 1 item that was over 9 years old. To be clear, a lot of this stuff was thrifted, so much of it is literally physically older than these amounts of time, but this is how long I had them in my closet. I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed that the highest amount is pieces from 1 to 2 years ago. You know, I like to think I keep things longer than that, but of course I try to with the majority of things I buy. These are just the things that didn't make the cut. Really, I should go through my entire wardrobe and try to accurately catalog how old everything is and then compare. That would be super interesting to me. Let me know if y'all would be interested in that as a video, or if I just need to do this on my own time. Anyway, I do think the concentration around 1 to 2 years actually makes sense, because I do usually try to give a piece at least a full year to marinate. Why did I just say it like that? Okay. I do usually try to give pieces at least a full year to marinate, see if I can make it work across all 4 seasons and such. Less than that seems like I didn't even give it a try. But if after a year something's still not working for me, that feels like a reasonable time to let it go. I also realized the 1 to 2 year category is not actually that much bigger than some of the others. And realistically, the items I decluttered are somewhat evenly concentrated across 1 to 4 years of use in my wardrobe, which feels pretty normal to me, especially for someone my age. I feel like the older you are, the more time you have to settle into your style and a more consistent lifestyle. But for someone in my 20s, most of my clothing being decluttered from 1 to 4 years ago, and some even older than that, seems pretty reasonable. I'd love to shift it all a little longer. That's what I'm working towards in the future, but I feel fine about this so far. I also just want to say body change didn't really come up for me here, but sometimes we cannot keep our clothes for years and years because our bodies change. And that is incredibly normal and common. And you don't have to feel bad about your clothes not lasting you for years and years if your body changes over those years. Even if you've only had something for a few months, if it doesn't fit, you can get rid of it and get something that does. I just feel like body changes can be a somewhat fraught topic when it comes to closet cleanouts and how long you feel like you should keep your clothes. But I just want to remind you, some people's bodies stay more the same, some people's bodies change more. Both are very normal and fine. Changes are a very natural, normal part of having a body, and you deserve to be comfortably clothed through all of those changes. I also thought it might be interesting to look at how I felt about the clothing that I decluttered after 1 year versus a few years versus many years. Because often when it's a year or less, my feelings towards an item I'm passing on are totally different than something I've had for like 6 years, for example. So for this data set, I categorized the things I decluttered as being things that never worked for me, things that I felt were just okay, or things I used to love but don't anymore. And once I broke it down by how long I had owned the items, the correlation was even stronger than I expected. As we can see here, for items I owned for 2 years or less, a large proportion of them got passed on because they never worked for me in the first place. And another large proportion were things that were just okay, meaning they were fine, but I wasn't really attached to them. I thought something else could work better, or they just weren't worth keeping in my wardrobe, especially before a big move. And none of them were things I used to love, but just don't anymore. That's sort of expected. I'm glad to see my tastes are not changing that fast. Then when we look at the middle tier, items I had had for 2 to 4 years, we have much fewer pieces that never worked for me. I assume because generally, if I figure out something's just not working for me and it's not going to, I try not to let it sit there for multiple years. Then we have a medium amount of items that are just okay. There are fewer in this group, I guess, because I just tend to weed out those items that I'm not really loving a little earlier. And then we have the third category making a significant appearance here, things I used to love but don't anymore. This makes sense to me. My tastes have definitely changed more from 2 to 4 years ago than they have in the past 2 years. Then finally, in the last category, items that were over 4 years old in my wardrobe, we have only 2 items that were just okay and still made it that far. And maybe I did used to like those more, but I never loved them. I don't know. However, the vast majority of things that lasted this long in my wardrobe were things that I once loved and wore a lot, but just don't now. This makes perfect sense to me because, ideally the things you're keeping for over 4 years in your wardrobe are things you love and want to wear and do wear. But alas, preferences change, lifestyles change, trends change, bodies change, etc. And it's okay to let go of something even if you once loved it or wore it a lot. This is something I'm really trying to internalize more. I have this impulse to hang on to everything that I at one point loved or wore frequently. And I think I have to accept that outgrowing myself from my early 20s is also a valid reason to let go of clothing. Finally, I also just wanted to look at the correlation between how long I owned something and where it originally came from. Because I started to notice while I was decluttering that gifts were a higher proportion of the things I had owned for a very short time or a very long time. So I noted it all down, put it in a graph, and my observation was confirmed. It's funny that the number of gifts is pretty similar across the board, but the proportion of them compared to things I bought myself varies quite dramatically. The items I had for less than a year were exclusively gifts. There were 4, and they were all work-related, YouTube-related items that just didn't end up working out in my wardrobe, and I don't have, sentimental attachment to them. So they were pretty easy to pass along to a new home. Then we can see in the middle, things I owned for 1 to 5 years. We have a few miscellaneous gifts, but the vast majority are things I bought myself. And then finally, for the things I owned for 5+ years, we have way fewer items that I bought myself that I have lasted this long in my wardrobe. But again, a higher proportion of gifts, a third of the items. And this is interesting because 5+ years ago, I was not on YouTube yet. So these are all gifts or hand-me-downs from my personal life, my friends and family, which I have a totally different relationship with compared to to work-related gifts. Obviously, these are very personal, thoughtful, sentimental, so I keep them around a lot longer versus things I bought myself, which I was able to let go of a little earlier. And a lot of these older gifts and hand-me-downs are things I really don't wear anymore and haven't worn regularly for quite some time, but I struggle to let go of them because they were gifts. So there's like a sentimental attachment, and also, honestly, sometimes you just feel guilty for getting rid of something that someone else got for you. You feel like you have to keep it forever. But you know what? If it's been 5 to 9+ years, I'd really be okay with someone passing on a gift I got for them. So I feel okay passing these things on. All right, to finish out this video, I just want to share some of my other stray observations that I didn't document in this spreadsheet, but I just noticed. This part is not data-driven statistical, it's more personal observation. One, I do not think I love spaghetti straps. I pass on so many spaghetti strap pieces. And I do still have some spaghetti straps in my wardrobe, but honestly, it's mostly because they're like perfect in every other way, and the one thing that would improve them would be thicker straps. So that's good to be aware of for the future. I think spaghetti straps just like don't always feel supportive enough. I also don't love carrying a bag on my shoulder right against my skin, so I like having a thicker strap there so that the bag strap can rest on it. And I also think a thicker strap just suits me better. I have somewhat wider shoulders in proportion to the rest of me, so I like how a wider strap kind of matches that. Two, I also do not love crop tops anymore, or at least not as cropped as the crop tops I wore previously. This makes a lot of sense to me looking back on a wardrobe that has transitioned from my early 20s to my late 20s. The context of my life and what I'm getting dressed for is just very different. Obviously, also the trends have shifted to a lower waistline and longer tops. I still love a high waist and I do not need all my tops to be long, but I think I want my crop tops to be a little less cropped than some of the ones I had that were like all the way up here. Honestly, those are my two main observations I didn't already cover. A lot of my other style preferences that were documented in this data were things I already knew about my style, like colors or silhouette, fit, fabric, etc. But those are the two things that didn't really occur to me until this closet clean out. So now I know. And now you know as well. With that, we have come to the end of all my observations about this closet clean out. What a journey. Thanks for joining me. I truly found this so interesting to examine. Obviously, this was just about me and my closet, but I hope you still found it interesting and maybe thought-provoking in regards to your own closet. I would also love to hear if you've noticed any of the same patterns in pieces you keep or declutter, or if yours are totally different. I'd be very curious to hear how this compares to other people in the way they use and manage their closets. Data and graphs not required. You can just tell me, like, from your own observations. So please do let me know in the comments. And oh, I heard if you do leave a comment, watch another video, and subscribe, you will gain some very valuable new insights into your wardrobe without having to make a spreadsheet about it.